The next paper is my own paper. So just by way of introducing myself again, I'm Rita Shackel, and I'm a professor of law and ethics at the University of Sydney Law School. I'm also currently the Associate Dean of Education at the law school. So the paper that I'm presenting today actually draws quite heavily on my experiences over the last few months as Associate Dean in transitioning my school and being part of Sydney University transitioning to online learning and assessment in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. So my presentation is entitled Ensuring Online Law School Examinations Are Fit for Purpose. And I'll just share my screen with you because I do have a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, let me just stop that and try again. Okay, so I'm glad that worked. The COVID-19 pandemic has, for many of us over the past semester, raised a number of different challenges, not only in terms of delivery of online learning, but more specifically also in terms of assessment of our students. One challenge that has been faced by many disciplines, but particularly probably more so by the professional schools like business, medicine and law, has been the need to shift our assessment away from formal invigilated exams to online exams. So for some, that choice was to adopt proctored or online invigilated exams. And very briefly, proctored examinations offer many benefits, but they also offer a host of challenges, including logistical challenges in administering those exams, particularly for very large unit of study cohorts. There are costs attached to proctoring. There are time issues around conveners and teachers having to review instances that might be flagged as potential integrity breaches. And there are also a host of privacy-related concerns for students, especially for disability-registered students. So proctored exams won't always be the best choice or be a possible choice in having to move assessments online. So I won't talk any further about proctored online examinations this afternoon, as that's beyond the scope of my presentation. What I'm interested in focusing on in my discussion this afternoon is the redesign from formal invigilated exams to delivery online of exams where there is an absence of any form or any means of supervision or invigilation. In the context of law exams, where in-depth assessment of knowledge and competencies is often difficult to achieve via only multiple choice questions or short answer questions, many law schools have had to redesign their formal exams to take the form of a take-home examination. So depending on the particular unit of study and subject matter, such exam papers will usually need to be redesigned to include legal problem style questions and or essay type questions. Clearly, in the absence of any invigilation or supervision, these take-home exams are open book exams. And for many of us, we're familiar with open book exams. So the notion of an open book exam of itself doesn't raise any special challenges in the most part in the redesign of law exams. In the context of COVID-19-led redesign of assessments, law schools and universities had very few choices but to move those assessments online. But it's important moving forward for us to pause and to actually reflect on the benefits that are offered by take-home examinations more generally. That is, other than the fact that they offer an online medium for examination as was needed in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And indeed, take-home exams are not new, nor are they a creation of COVID-19. We've long been using take-home examinations in a range of contexts and ways as an assessment of law students and in legal education. So drawing on the relevant research and published literature, there are two main benefits that emerge in the use of take-home examinations. First, take-home exams are well recognised to reduce students' anxiety. And secondly, they are an excellent tool when it comes to testing students' higher order thinking skills. In the context of legal education, the need to reduce student anxiety is actually a significant consideration, given that research from around the globe points to very high levels of stress and anxiety amongst law students and law graduates, which also can be seen to mark the profession itself. Further, some researchers have also suggested that take-home exams in law make sense, as this type of examination methodology more closely replicates what the typical law graduate will most likely do when he or she embarks upon legal or law-related careers. Namely, that this type of exam methodology makes sense as it focuses on measuring the student's capacity to think analytically as opposed to his or her ability to simply memorise or regurgitate vast quantities of information. On the other hand, take-home examinations raise some key challenges. And as I mentioned before, particularly for professional or accredited programs and degrees, where there may be high stakes at play in terms of having to attest to accreditation bodies that students have actually acquired certain competencies and knowledge. So two key challenges are first, that using take-home examinations instead of formal or invigilated exams opens up the risk for academic integrity being compromised. So for example, can you be sure that a particular student has actually authored the take-home examination response? The risks are also increased in terms of plagiarism, contract cheating and collusion. And a second challenge is that in some respects, take-home examinations may actually be more challenging and more difficult for students to prepare and to write. Take-home exams may have strict word limits attached to them, and so students will need to be much more discerning and disciplined in their writing in a take-home examination compared to pen-to-paper exams. So in fact, the mode of examination is potentially altering what in fact is being assessed. That is the skills that we are testing in our students. So what then are the key questions and considerations that we should be reflecting on in designing or redesigning our take-home examinations to ensure that our all take-home exams are of the highest quality and that they are actually fit for purpose? So I have 6 key considerations for reflection. The first is that we need to ask what types of questions are necessary in order to measure student learning and student achievement effectively in the particular unit of study, and what type of questions will permit the desired learning outcomes to be measured. Secondly, with that question in mind, we need to ask questions around the appropriate duration for the take-home exam. Is a short release exam more appropriate, or is a longer release exam more appropriate in the context of the particular unit of study? So at Sydney Law School, as we were going through this redesign process, we actually found ourselves categorising our take-home exams as either short release take-home exams up to 4 hours in duration, or longer release take-home exams, which might extend over several days, but typically not longer than 72 hours. Thirdly, again, bearing in mind the first question and the imperative to design to measure specific learning outcomes, it's also necessary to consider whether the exam paper should have word limits attached to it or not. And if so, what are the appropriate word limits to be set? So this consideration would need to balance providing students with a sufficient word count to demonstrate their learning and attainment of the learning outcomes on the one hand, whilst also balancing the need not to make the word limits so tight so as to fuel student anxiety unnecessarily. There may also, for the school, be considerations to be had around marking capacity or strain on examiners if word limits were not to be imposed. Fourthly, we need to consider how academic integrity risks can be minimised, recognising that the integrity risks are increased with online assessment, as I mentioned previously. Fifthly, we need to make design decisions that maintain academic integrity and rigour, as I've said, but also minimise potential student anxiety and distress. And sixthly, we need to design exams that are based on the actual technological capacity at hand, and that there is in place available support for students, and also bearing in mind any other practical or logistical considerations. So what I'd like to do now in the remaining time that I have is to look more specifically at the issue of academic integrity risks, and to talk a little bit about the different mitigation strategies that might be employed. There are a range of mitigation strategies that could be used to mitigate the different risks that I've already mentioned. Importantly, effective mitigation of academic integrity risks requires multiple strategies to be utilised. So as you can see from this next slide, I've categorised mitigation strategies into one of 3 main groups. So the first group of mitigation strategies are linked to the substantive build of the exam. So that is our decisions and our chosen approaches to the nature and the choice of questions that we will use in any particular exam. So the type of considerations here are first recognising that this is an open book format, and then designing appropriate questions, questions that are more abstract and complex in form and matter. For example, that require a high degree of extrapolation, interpretation, and analogy, avoiding single topic questions, using questions that engage critical thinking and exposition, that is, that require application with explanation and evaluation, using questions that ask students to explain their processes, their research strategies, pathways to conclusions, their rationale for the choices that they've made. Perhaps using problems and case examples that are specific to the unit of study or to a specific known context, using questions that are linked to specific class materials or activities, discussions, previous assignments, perhaps using a question that requires personal reflection, and linking questions to a current contemporary issue or context. The second group of strategies relate to the exam format and the more technical specifications of the exam. So, for example, requiring that the student's response be only submitted in electronic written type in a particular format, requiring that students don't mask their document properties, and having mechanisms to inspect those properties after submission, using appropriate strict time and word limits, perhaps requiring students to keep drafts, or progressively requiring students to save working files which can then be audited, and actually implementing processes for random auditing of students' saved files. Using exam-specific sites, which is a strategy that we adopted at the University of Sydney. The third category is implementing appropriate processes around the design and delivery of take-home exams. So, for example, ensuring that markers are provided useful guidance with respect to interpreting Turnitin reports, ensuring that examiners are familiar with some of the indicators of outsourced work or contract cheating, conducting web-based searches of exam questions after the conclusion of exams, not using past questions or questions developed by a third party. And importantly, also working with students to inculcate students that they themselves have certain responsibilities in terms of academic honesty, and ensuring the academic integrity of take-home exams. So familiarising students with academic honesty policies, asking students to sign declarations or a compliance statement. Preparing students for the take-home exam well in advance by circulating instructions or cover sheets a week or 2 weeks out of the exam. And implementing appropriate security measures like ensuring that finalised papers and exam sites are restricted access only. So in summary then, in the design of take-home exams in law, we should recognise that take-home exams are inherently different in nature and form to pen and paper exams, that the form of the exam must be aligned with what the assessment seeks to achieve and measure, that there is careful consideration given to the academic integrity risks and implementation of strategies to minimise these risks, and finally that there is appropriate support and infrastructure implemented around the take-home exam. So that's actually my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon. and I will now stop sharing my screen and take any questions if there are any. Let me have a look here. Please do send any questions that you might have through so that I'm not asking myself questions. Okay, I have a question here. Let me have a look. Hi, could you please elaborate a bit further on Sydney Law's experience on the use of exam-specific sites? Yes, so we actually decided that we would build, as an institution, exam specific sites for each unit of study that was administering an online exam of any kind, including take-home exams. And those exam-specific sites were actually built within our learning platform, Canvas. And it was a strategy that we decided on for the purpose of quality assurance and security as well. So having those exam sites meant that we could shut access to those exam sites, and we could also be working in those exam sites outside of the usual Canvas site that we would be using for students. Once the final papers were actually finalised and ready to go, then those exam sites were shut down, but to the convener and to our Law Digital support team. And that ensured that we were fairly confident of the security around those exams. Students were prepared for the use of those exam sites in order to ensure that there wasn't confusion, and it also enabled us at the end of the exam to lock those exams so that students would not be able to submit their paper late. So that was one of the challenges that we faced, and where some difficult decisions had to be made around where you cut off submission for students, because we did take the view that, like a pen and paper exam, we could not have late submissions for our take-home exams as well. I think I'm almost out of time, and I can see, okay, another question here very quickly. Thank you. Do you think there is a tendency towards take-home exams and using research paper as a form of exam because they are easy to manage? Given the current situation, how to ensure diversity of exam formats? Look, my first response to that question is actually that I don't think the redesign of pen and paper exams to take-home exams is a straightforward, easy option. Quite to the contrary, I think that redesign process needs a lot of thinking through. It's not possible to take a formal exam paper that you've designed for the purpose of a formal invigilated exam, and then just offer it as a take-home exam. So I think there are a lot of challenges in that redesign process, particularly bearing in mind that fundamental imperative of ensuring that your paper actually measures student achievement and the learning outcomes. Now, I believe that